Love, Hate, and Propaganda, a 6-part series with George Stroumboulopoulos. 70 years later, why World War II still matters.
This is a series about a world gone mad and a war of terrifying destruction. Tonight, the story of a few powerful people who persuaded tens of millions of others to fight and how they used propaganda to do it. Take a look at these faces. You've seen them before. In World War II, they inspired respect or fear or both. Maybe love and devotion, for a while anyway. But how did they do it? How did all these men persuade people to follow? This is a series about the psychology of war, not the battles or military maneuvers. It's about people, how they were led and misled, how for years they were bombarded with messages everywhere. At that time, what you believed could be the difference between life and death in a time of love, hate, and propaganda.
In 1920s Germany, a small-time politician is creating a big stir. Many people know his name, but almost no one knows his face. And that's the way Adolf Hitler wants it. He doesn't allow pictures of himself to be published. It's a deliberate gimmick to create mystery, and it's working. Everywhere, the buzz is, what does Hitler look like? Even newspapers speculate on it. Hitler turns down $20,000 for a single photo of himself. If you want to see his face, well, you have to attend one of his meetings.
You can say that his refusal to have his photo taken is a way of managing from the very beginning, in a very, very professional way, his own image.
Enter Heinrich Hoffmann, a freelance photographer who's always up for a challenge. He receives a telegram from a news service. Send at once. Photo Adolf Hitler. Stop. Honorarium $100. That's a lot of money in the 20s, so Hoffmann spends a week staking out the entrance of a Nazi newspaper. Eventually, Hitler shows up. Hoffmann clicks the shutter. He thinks he's got the shot, but Hitler's bodyguards grab the camera and destroy the negative.
Not a great way to start a relationship, so Hoffmann decides to befriend Hitler instead of stalking him. And later, when Hitler is good and ready to have his picture taken, Hoffmann will become his photographer.
This is the first official image of Adolf Hitler. Hoffmann will go on to take hundreds of thousands more photographs, each one helping to create the picture-perfect image. Perception is everything.
People like what they see, and they like what they hear when they crowd into the beer halls to listen to him speak about a strong, new Germany. But what was it that made his message so appealing?
Timing, for starters. Hitler came on the scene as leader of the Nazi Party after Germany was defeated in the First World War, called the War to End All Wars. As part of the humiliating surrender, Germany had to give up land. reduce its army, and the ultimate insult, pay war damages. And doesn't help that there's a worldwide depression. The economy, like everything else, is in ruins. Anger and unrest spill into the streets. Hitler and the Nazis exploit the chaos by providing specific targets. Political opponents, like the communists, and minority groups, like the Jews.
The Jew was utilized as a hate figure for which the Nazi Party could mobilize grievances around, and so therefore was an important escape valve, a sort of scapegoat, if you like.
Hitler plans on moving up. He already calls himself the Führer, the leader. He calculates the time is right to make a grab for power. Basically, overthrow the government. So he stages a violent coup. And that's where the plan falls apart.
That is a huge political failure. It's also, if you like, a thuggish behavior. To try and turn with weapons and arms against the state is a kind of behavior that many people who, after all, in the mid-1920s, were looking for some stability.
Hitler is sent to jail for treason. There he realizes that the way to power is not by force alone. He will also have to apply the art of persuasion to win the people over. He writes a book, Mein Kampf, where his plan is clearly outlined. He says the masses are stupid, so the message must be simple and be repeated over and over. And what is the message? Sell Hitler to the people.
It actually builds on this notion of a charismatic leader, and this was known as the Führer code. And the projection of the Führer code becomes a major plank of the Nazi Party throughout the 1930s.
Out of jail, Hitler wastes no time putting his plan into action. First thing, a new photo by Heinrich Hoffmann. It is carefully staged. The pose, the look, the car, the setting. This man looks like a Führer.
It's a first symbolic moment of the repackaging of the Hitler myth, which is the Hitler myth that we know, as opposed to the earlier Hitler myth. What was symbolic was Hitler is back.
And he's not alone. He has the Nazi Party behind him, and soon, a master strategist at his side.
The guy who's going to really bring the Hitler image into sharp focus is a nasty character named Joseph Goebbels.
Goebbels likes to be called Herr Doctor. He has a PhD in romantic literature, and this guy loves the challenge of manipulating the masses. He even writes, the people want to be bamboozled. Goebbels loves Hitler, and also hates Jews.
Sie sollen sich hüten. Einmal wird unsere Geduld zu Ende sein und dann wird den Juden das freche Lügenmaul gestopft werden.
And the Nazis mobilize that hate propaganda in the streets. Hitler's private army is known to beat up or murder its opponents. At the same time, the Nazis work on Hitler's image by building on his strengths. They issue postcards that make him stand out from every other politician. And he can work a crowd like no one else.
I think the closest equivalent is to imagine being in a music concert. From the moment you enter a crowd, you lose your individual identity and you become this big wave of people. It's part of packaging, if you like, Hitler as something completely different to anything else in political terms that was available at the time.
Der Hitler spirit carries you away. It is German and right.
Louisa Solnitz is awestruck, like almost everyone else in Hamburg. A mother and teacher, Louisa and her husband Friedrich are your typical Nazi supporters. At least, for now.
I shall never forget the moment when he drove past us in his brown uniform, performing the Hitler salute in his own personal way. The enthusiasm of the crowd blazed up to the heavens.
Hitler has made quite a comeback, from sitting behind bars to mesmerizing the masses. But as every politician knows, it never hurts to show your softer side.
So Heinrich Hoffmann releases the book, The Hitler No One Knows. A series of photographs that make the Führer look like everyone's favorite uncle. And Hitler seems to be everywhere in a bid to get elected. He's the first to use the airplane as part of an extensive campaign strategy, speaking in 20 cities in 6 days, and it's paying off. Enough people buy into the Hitler image that the Nazis gain power in 1933. Hitler becomes the leader of Germany. Louisa Solnitz, the teacher from Hamburg, celebrates his victory at a torchlight parade.
Next to us, a little boy, 3 years of age, raised his tiny hand again and again. Heil Hitler! Heil Hitlermann!
One of his first moves is to get rid of democracy and make himself dictator. Now the propaganda machine really kicks into high gear.
You could see him live. You could see him in the photographs. Next step, motion pictures. It's time to put Hitler in the movies.
Germans, like most people at the time, loved to escape to the cinema. One of the big attractions is actor Leni Riefenstahl, who is also a talented director.
She wasn't afraid of anything. She climbed the highest summit, she left the world behind, and she stood on top as a towering figure above the earth.
When Adolf Hitler sees her in a movie, he thinks she is the perfect German female and the perfect director to make him a movie star. So he orders Riefenstahl to make a film on the annual Nazi Party rally in Nuremberg. She's given a huge budget, a crew of hundreds, and a ready-made cast of thousands. It results in Triumph of the Will, one of the most notorious and powerful propaganda films of all time.
This is the first time the German people saw Hitler, really, at close-up. There hadn't been a close-up before. So at the first time, the people could see their Führer in action.
So sei dann unser Gelöbnis an diesem Abend, in jeder Stunde, an jedem Tag, nur zu denken an Deutschland, an Volk und an Reich, an unsere deutsche Nation. Unser deutsches Volk siegt heil! Siegt heil!
Her talent makes Hitler into a kind of Superman. Looking down on ants, marching people, the crowd is only one man and the masses. Riefenstahl, I think, gives you a very good example of the power of the image, which can be dangerous.
Es ist unser Wunsch und Wille, dass dieser Staat und dieses Reich bestehen sollen in den kommenden Jahrtausenden.
This is a new Germany. This is a reborn Germany. This is a Germany that everybody has to take into account now. If people outside Germany were already apprehensive about what was happening in Germany, and many were, that was a very, very good opportunity for them to be even more frightened.
Die Partei ist Hitler! Hitler aber ist Deutschland, wie Deutschland Hitler ist! Hitler siegt!
Hitler, once a faceless politician, has now become a godlike icon. He is rearming Germany, and Europe looks on nervously. In 1934, Adolf Hitler flies over the Alps to meet his neighbor, Italian dictator Benito Mussolini. Now, Mussolini is a true fascist. In fact, he came up with the word fascism to describe his particular brand of right-wing authoritarian rule. Hitler is wearing a suit because he was advised it's not a good idea to show up in a uniform in someone else's country. But Mussolini, he looks sharp in his military outfit. A bad start. The body language says it all.
There's this sort of almost like cold atmosphere between the two. The two meet in 1934, and it's an absolute disaster of a meeting. They don't communicate well, they don't gel in that respect. So initially, there's actually antagonism between the two.
Hitler was upstaged, which must have been disappointing. He's always been fascinated with Mussolini, even modeled himself on him. After all, Mussolini was the original fascist dictator.
He had it all. Political style, flamboyance, a taste for the outrageous, and pictures of himself everywhere. It makes him one of the most popular leaders of his time.
Mussolini is a charismatic personality with many different faces. And the different faces and the different images of Mussolini were part of this creation of this image of this man of almost superhuman qualities.
At the time, there were people who were mad about him. They'd send him love letters. He could have admiring letters come in from children, old people, young people, women, lots of women.
On the surface, Mussolini cuts a fine figure, but beneath the charm, a calculating politician who rules with brute force.
Mussolini is the guy that gained power in 1922 with the help of his own personal army of thugs, the infamous Black Shirts. And in power, he calls himself Il Duce, the leader, and acts like a new Roman emperor. And emperors like to build empires, so Mussolini sets out to conquer Ethiopia, to force it under Italian rule.
Mussolini was able to convey to not just the Italian people, but to people from all over the world, that here was a strong leader. Here was a leader, a dictator of Italy, who could live up to his own propaganda image, an image that he himself had been very careful to perpetuate.
Armed with outdated weapons, the Ethiopians are no match for Mussolini's modern military and his use of illegal mustard gas. The world condemns the attack. Sanctions are imposed on Italy. Right now, Mussolini needs a friend.
who's the only one standing by Mussolini's side? Adolf Hitler. He's keen to lend Mussolini a little moral support.
Germany starts sending economic help and also military help to Italy. And by the end of the Ethiopian War, Mussolini is very much indebted to Hitler for his help during that difficult period. And this is the beginning of the closing, strengthening, deepening relationship between the two. Visits here, visits there.
So now Hitler and Mussolini have bonded. To celebrate, a brand new picture book by Hitler's photographer, Heinrich Hoffmann.
So while Hitler has found a friend in Mussolini, soon he's going to have to pay attention to another man with a completely different worldview. And this man will become one of the biggest players in the Second World War, Joseph Stalin.
Joseph Stalin is General Secretary of the Communist Party, the leader of the Soviet Union. He's been working hard to industrialize this underdeveloped country. And happy faces give the impression that communism is a success, a workers' utopia, equality for all, thanks to the steady hand of Joseph Stalin.
He's a sort of dependable figure. He's not the charismatic figure. He's not the multidimensional figure that Mussolini is. He's not the mythical figure that Hitler is. He's just the safe pair of hands with the iron will to bring Russia, this new Soviet Union, into a new era of industrialization, of economic progress, of military might.
Stalin was omnipresent throughout the Soviet Union. His image was everywhere. People then became completely fascinated by it. You know, one might sort of say that it was definitely a semi-religious cult which was created around his persona.
Stalin, through that persona, asks the Soviet people, doesn't really ask them, but the idea is, trust me, I know where this country is going. I know that it will need painful sacrifices.
The truth is that Stalin is really only prepared to sacrifice others, and he doesn't find it painful at all, because Comrade Stalin is actually manipulative, paranoid, and ruthless. People are terrified of him, and for good reason.
If you look behind the curtain of propaganda, you'd find a brutal dictatorship based on terror. These are the images Stalin doesn't want anyone to see. Forced labor camps to help build the state. Genocide of Ukrainian peasants through famine. If he suspects the loyalty of anyone, politicians, generals, they will be shot.
Stalin ruled through uncertainty and fear, and everybody around him never knew from one day to the next whether they might be arrested and sent off to a camp or literally shot in the back of the neck in an NKVD cellar.
Stalin's efforts to ensure total loyalty were sometimes bizarre. There were records like this one, with his speech on one side and nothing but applause on the other. And then there's a story about one speech he gave where everyone rose to applaud. But here's the problem. Who was going to be the first to stop clapping?
The story goes that no one would dare to stop and show that they loved Stalin the least. So out of sheer terror, the applause went on and on. Eventually, one man was the first to stop. The next day, he was arrested, his fate unknown. 1930s Europe. There are now 3 dictators on the scene. On one side, the fascists, Hitler and Mussolini. On the other, the communist, Joseph Stalin. Two opposing ideologies set to clash. The battleground will be Spain. In 1936, a violent civil war breaks out. It begins when fascists, led by General Francisco Franco, overthrow the elected left-wing government. Europeans have a terrifying sense of déjà vu.
Imagine how shocked people are. This was just never supposed to happen after the horrors of the First World War.
Hitler and Mussolini are quick to lend support to the fascist side with tanks and aircraft. And Stalin sends weapons to the leftists.
The Spanish Civil War becomes a proxy war. It becomes a big war of ideologies. Some people, some historians have described it as the battlefield of Europe's civil war between the major ideologies of that period, which was, if you like, communism and fascism.
The stark reality of the newsreel images underscores the brutality of the war.
These pictures are not attractive, but the events that they report are not attractive either.
People went to the cinema on a regular basis, and the newsreels were very popular. And so, for many Europeans who were watching these newsreels for the first time, they had this enormous fear that what was happening in Spain could also apply to their own cities as well.
Europeans are all too aware that wars start small and spread. Even when the Spanish Civil War is resolved with fascists taking power, an uneasy tension remains throughout the continent. Tokyo, 1936. Tatsuzo Ishikawa is an award-winning novelist. Like everyone else, he's grown up believing that Japan's emperor is a living god, and that his country has a divine mission to rule Asia. Ishikawa also knows that the hostilities between Japan and China go back decades. Japan wants more territory and the natural resources that go with it, so Japan invades China. In 1937, what started as skirmishes erupts into all-out war. Ishikawa is keen to do his patriotic part.
Japan sends all kinds of artists, painters, and poets to the front. They're expected to send back glorious tales of heroism.
Ishikawa signs up to travel with the army and write about the war for a popular magazine. He's hoping for adventure. At the front, the Japanese army crushes Chinese opposition. First, Shanghai falls. Then Nanking. In Japan, there's celebration. You could even snack on Fall of Nanking noodles with a piece of tempura shaped as a bomb. But on the front, it's a bitter reality. When Ishikawa arrives in Nanking, he is shocked. Japanese soldiers have gone on a rampage of murder and rape. Li Shou-ying is a 19-year-old resident of Nanking. She was 6.5 months pregnant when Japanese soldiers burst into her house.
I wanted to die. I was fearless. 2 other Japanese soldiers came over, thrust their bayonets into my face. The soldier thrust his bayonet into my stomach.
Miraculously, she survives 37 stab wounds, but she loses her baby.
I think what was underlying this brutality, this violence, was that they didn't consider these victims as people. They were desensitized to the people that they were hurting.
As the Japanese advance through the countryside, Alphonse Dubé can hear the planes and bombs in the distance. This priest from Quebec runs a small Jesuit mission, a walled compound northwest of Nanking. Soon, terrified refugees flood in, on the run from the Japanese army. Dubé finds himself protecting hundreds of people in his tiny compound. He knows the Japanese won't enter his mission while a foreigner is present, so Dubé never leaves his post.
I realize what responsibility is and what it means to be the only person who can get us through. One false step, and the boat is sinking.
For Father Dubé, it was extremely stressful to be placed in this situation where he's one of the few foreigners in such a desperate situation. We have accounts of him breaking out into cold sweats, having sleepless nights, wondering how he's going to protect these people.
After a month, the Japanese soldiers leave the area. Father Dubé is hailed as a hero, having saved the lives of 400 people. In Nanking, the death toll is in the hundreds of thousands. Writer Tatsuzo Ishikawa mingles with the Japanese soldiers and gets their stories. He returns to Japan and begins to write.
I virtually did not sleep. Every waking moment was spent at my desk until I finished writing.
He writes 300 pages in 11 days.
Hirao thrust his bayonet 3 times into the woman's chest. The other soldiers joined in, stabbing her at random. In little over 10 seconds, the woman was dead.
The story doesn't hide the atrocities. It isn't the propaganda the army expected him to write.
The magazine takes a risk and prints most of it. But just as it's about to go on sale, censors shut it down, and Ishikawa is arrested.
In court, he says he just wanted to show the truth.
People think of soldiers at the front as gods and believe that a paradise is built overnight in the territories occupied by our troops. But war is not such an agreeable affair. I was convinced that telling people the truth about war was indispensable.
Ishikawa is convicted for writings that disturb peace and order. He and his family are ostracized. The war between Japan and China will go on for 7 years, killing more than 20 million people. It will eventually merge with the war that is only still brewing in Europe. The late 30s. Hitler's personal photographer, Heinrich Hoffmann, keeps feeding the public positive pictures of his master. Hitler is more popular than ever, even though he's destroyed democracy, declared himself dictator for life, and jailed or killed his opponents. People don't seem to mind when even the most innocent of events contain anti-Semitic messages of hate.
The Nazis talked about a people's community. It was not an inclusive community. It was intrinsically an exclusive community. And it was exclusive based not on your political allegiances, but on your race.
For those included in the people's community, there are plenty of distractions. People's cinemas, people's cars, and the item everyone wants, their very own radio.
It's kind of hard to imagine the days before radio or any other kind of instant communication, but radio is going to play a huge role. And guess who's one of the first people to see its potential? Hitler's own Minister of Propaganda, Joseph Goebbels.
Goebbels takes over all German radio stations. His plan is to get people listening to Nazi broadcasts. But radios themselves are a luxury. So he orders factories to make people's radios, which are less than half the normal price. Nazi programming is soon heard in millions of German homes. Radio becomes a powerful propaganda tool and a way to reach all corners of Germany.
But Goebbels has another powerful tool, the printed word. The Nazis have banned opposition newspapers, leaving only the friendly ones.
A so-called friendly paper is the viciously anti-Semitic Der Stürmer. It's run by Julius Streicher, who dubs himself Jew Baiter #1. Streicher also promotes hate by publishing children's books filled with anti-Semitic messages. It doesn't matter if you're Albert Einstein or Sigmund Freud. If you are Jewish, or if the Nazis consider your books dangerous, your work will be destroyed. Louisa Solmitz, the young schoolteacher and devoted supporter of Hitler, buys right into the Nazi idea of a pure German community.
From January 1st on, all with genetic diseases and habitual criminals are to be sterilized. What a blessing for mankind if this will eventually be carried out.
The Nazis bar Jewish people from the professions and civil service. They become second-class citizens.
From that point onwards, start a series of legal measures that little by little will make Jews not just biological exiles, but also social exiles, economic exiles, political exiles, cultural exiles.
Louisa Solmitz and her husband Friedrich are proud Germans and practicing Protestants. Friedrich is a First World War veteran. But the Nuremberg laws of 1935 clearly define the target. If your grandparents were Jewish, you are now considered Jewish. Friedrich's grandparents were Jewish. With that, everything changes for the Solmitz family.
We are standing apart from anyone and anybody. It is an abyss which can't be crossed.
The laws go so far as to make it illegal for anyone labeled a Jew to marry or have sex with non-Jews.
Any man who marries my daughter will land up in the penitentiary, and she with him. Our child is cast out, excluded, despised, worthless.
But even as Hitler excludes more people, he is still stoking nationalist fervor. He marches into the Rhineland in 1936 and takes over Austria in 1938. He says he's reuniting Greater Germany. On the home front, the Nazis ramp up their campaign of hatred with a coordinated attack on Jewish homes, businesses, and synagogues. ordinary Germans join in or look the other way. It is called Kristallnacht, or the Night of the Broken Glass. 91 Jews are killed, 20,000 are rounded up and sent to concentration camps. Louisa Solnitz now fears for the worst.
Now Freddie admits it too. We are annihilated.
Now Hitler wants to expand Germany's borders even further. His ruthless ambition will ignite the most devastating war in history.
Who is going to help tortured humanity away from war to peace? Easy to answer. Nothing. And no one. A butchery is beginning, such as the world has not yet experienced.